Born Giving by Alison Galbreath. The day before. I think I was born giving, or at least I assume, because I don't remember a time when one hand didn't need to be stretched out for another. From conversations I've had, this is a common experience for siblings of individuals with disabilities who have had to take on some sort of caretaking role. It comes from a sense of love or duty or something else entirely, but anyway, the results are the same. A need to be the responsible, independent, perfect child. There's a rigidness to that image that is so contradictory to everything I was ever meant to be, and yet here I am, continuing to be the golden child. I think the only thing that could have surpassed pastor in my family's eyes is perhaps doctor. I'm thinking about this as I'm helping my parents move out of my childhood home, and I'm loading my own car to leave for the East Coast to start my Master's of Divinity. It's going to be a 3-day trip, and they're both traveling with me, so putting the totes into my car has become a strange game of Tetris. The trip is 1,486 miles. If we drove without stopping, it would take 22.5 hours. I'm not unfamiliar with long road trips. When I was little, we traveled 12 hours to visit my grandparents, the trunk crammed full of bags, blankets, and snacks, while me and my siblings were all shoved into the middle of the van. Looking back, I don't know how my parents managed that. Trapped in a car with 3 toddlers for 12 hours. It's a miracle they didn't leave us on the side of the road. Packing is harder than I thought it would be. This trip, moving so far, it feels selfish, and maybe it is. Maybe living into my call to ministry is a selfish thing. Or maybe it's a gift, and I just have to let myself take it. Receiving is hard when you're so used to giving. Day 1. We set off shortly after noon. I dry off the lunch dishes, place them back in their proper shelves, and then slip into the driver's seat of my car. I listen to the sound of my seatbelt clicking, followed by 2 others. I don't cry as we leave the driveway, but I didn't cry the first time we moved or when I left undergrad. I just turned the radio up a little louder. If God is reaching out with an outstretched hand, what does it mean to accept it? What does it take? I'd say it first takes vulnerability, which may explain why it feels so counter to my nature. Vulnerability means imperfection, a crack in the glass, a bump in the road. And this isn't to say that I think I'm perfect, I'm not, but that doesn't necessarily mean I want others to know what exactly the problems are. Annie Dillard, the author of Teaching a Stone to Talk, writes, "It is difficult to undo our own damage and to recall to our presence that which we have asked to leave. The very holy mountains are keeping mum. We douse the burning bush and cannot rekindle it." I think that's what we've done to vulnerability, to raw honesty. We've doused it in the expectations of others and we cannot rekindle it. Or maybe that's the psychology student in me who wants to dig into the silent, holy mountains of our lives and force them to speak. If I dig deep enough, go back far enough, I can figure out where this need to appear perfect came from and banish it from ever existing. We stop at a gas station off the highway. This one has the world's largest prairie chicken across the street. Surprisingly, this is not very noteworthy. Every other town has signs proudly boasting their strange little local statues and other roadside distractions. I'm filling up the car while my parents run inside to refill their coffee mugs. When we head back out, I slip into the passenger seat for a while, having served my time in the driver's side for the day. I hate driving. I always have. It's not that I'm scared of it or anything. It's just dreadfully boring. Does telling you that count as vulnerability? From vulnerability, one can find authenticity. Authenticity seems to be a buzzword in leadership circle, as it's this whole idea that your values and actions should align, and even when life gets rough, yada yada. By being my authentic self, can I let go of this picture of perfection I painted myself into? I signal for my mom to take the next off-ramp on the right. We made good time getting to Minneapolis-St. Paul, arriving after rush hour and sailing through the city. We find a motel for the night. Day 2. We wake up early to get started. I am not a morning person. Knowing this, my mom volunteers to drive first, nudging me to the back of the car to get a little extra sleep. I debate whether I should argue or not. She drove us to the motel last night after all. I hesitate too long, though. She's already sitting in the driver's seat as my dad takes the passenger side. With a sigh, I push our overnight bags over to make a little extra room in the back and buckle up. Travel memoirist Eddie L. Harris wrote in his 1998 memoir, Mississippi Solo, "It's not always the selfish man who receives. Sometimes it takes a pretty big heart to receive, to let someone share with you. You have to put aside your ego and pride, and you'd be surprised because some people are just dying to give and have no one to give to." Ego and pride. Those are the things that stop us from being vulnerable enough to accept an outstretched hand. We conflate ourselves to greatness because we must be faster, smarter, and better to compete in a society focused more on the results than the questions. It's pride and ego that kept me from pursuing my call into ministry in the first place. As Dillard says, holiness is a force, and like others, it can be resisted. If I resisted God's call for long enough, I could pursue a career in something with more prestige, or at least with a higher pay. But resisting meant lying to myself. It meant becoming even more rigid. It meant refining myself until all that was left was what others wanted. That realization made it easier when the time came for me to decide whether or not to even think about ordination. I could put my ego and pride aside just long enough to hear the call that God was giving me. Car sickness, unlike calling, is not a gift. I've dealt with car sickness since I was a little kid. Those 12-hour trips to Grandma and Grandpa's, I had a designated bucket. I make Mom pull over at the next gas station to switch spots. As much as I hate driving, it's better than sitting in the back sick to my stomach. In the front seat, I am in control, my hands on the wheel and my old T-Swift CD playing in the background. Along with the letting go of pride and ego to accept my call, I have to let go of control. Every day is like a mini trust fall, and now I am taking a leap by moving halfway across the country to study theology. Dillard says, "The thing is to stalk your call in a certain skilled and supple way, to locate the most tender and live spot and plug into that pulse." Finding your calling is an art, taking soul searching and discernment, and once it's found, a person must embrace it. I decide to embrace my call when I started pursuing ordination, when I appeared in front of DCOM, when I enrolled to Wesley. We stop at a hotel outside of Cleveland for the second night. I sleep hard enough that I don't hear the cars on the interstate in the middle of the night. Day 3. It smells like rain in the morning. Dark clouds rolling overhead. I take navigations for the first half of the trip and watch the miles count down. In a few hours, we'll be in D.C. Goodness takes two, a giver and a receiver, or so Harris writes. If God is giving grace, then I must choose if I am to receive it. If God is giving a calling, I must choose if I am to follow it. It takes two. I must decide if I am willing to accept the grace and love offered to me. It seems like an easy choice when it's laid out like that. Who wouldn't choose love? To choose God's love, though, I have to let go of pride and ego and control and allow myself to be vulnerable. It means shattering the image of perfection I spent so long crafting and trusting that there will be enough left to accomplish what I am called to do. The rain starts as we cross into the District of Columbia. I'd taken the wheel again a while back. We pull off into a parking lot for a moment, allowing the worst of the storm to pass before driving onto campus. As we roll into the parking lot of the campus, the decision becomes real. It's no longer hypothetical. As much as I once strived to be the perfect golden child, it isn't who I am meant to be. As much as I am called to give and love, I'm also called to receive the love God has given me. I have to choose if I'm going to lean into that call, if I'm going to accept that outstretched hand. I cut the engine and I decide.